Alright, so I came across this question, and it's not what I've been doing recently. It's not like solving a problem kind of question that I've been doing a lot of recently. But it has a lot to do with subjects that I'm very familiar with. So I thought would actually be able to give a decent answer to this question just from my own general understanding of this. First of all, the question is, what's the importance of robotics education in school? And I noticed here on the end it says Zest chip. I had no idea what that was. So I just did a quick web search and I came across this article, which, given the similarity of the wording and, it's on this site called Zest chip, I'm assuming that the question must be somehow referencing this article. I gave a quick read through, but most of my answer isn't coming from this. I just wanted to present this to let you know that this might have something to do with the question. I'm not 100% sure of that. So, the importance of robotics education in school is kind of an interesting one. It's been, in recent years, it's been taking off a lot. First in colleges and universities, and it's definitely becoming pretty prominent in many of the a lot of high schools and such. Even middle schools and younger ages are getting involved in this in various ways, and they find it beneficial for a number of reasons. The first thing that occurs to me on this subject is to make an analogy to something else. So, if you go back a couple of decades, you'll see that computers were not nearly as common as they are now. Now, these days, almost everyone has a computer. Particularly in a first world country, almost everyone will have a computer or access to a computer available to them. And almost every job will require some use of a computer in one way or another. So, when you look at the education that we have these days with respect to computers, I mean, there's all kinds of levels. You can go from just basic, computer maintenance and operation all the way on up to advanced programming of all types. And so what I see as something that's happened is not everyone that, say, graduates from high school learns how to program a computer. Some people do, but a lot don't. But one thing that most people will learn before they finish high school is about using, for instance, a word processor. Whatever word processor you're going to use. They'll learn how to make text documents on a computer. They may even learn how to, type in an efficient manner. And that's because almost everyone is going to use those skills in whatever they do later on in life these days. So it's simply, with that mindset, it's just a valuable thing to have later on. But on the other hand, of course, not everyone's going to learn how to program. But more and more people are learning how to program, at least on a basic level. And of course, the reason for that is that market of jobs is opening up more and more as time goes on. I mean, one of the most common jobs you can get these days, overall in any industry, is actually coding. There's so many different things you could be coding. One of them could be robotics, by the way, but there's a ton of other things that you could be designing and implementing code for. So, I mean, this can go anywhere from web design to I don't even know. That's not my field of expertise, so I can't say too much about it. But it's everywhere these days. It's expanding, and as people realize there's jobs in that, more and more people are encouraged to learn to do that in one way or another. So robotics isn't at the same point, of course, as computers are currently. Not everyone owns a robot. Not everyone would currently see the use of having a robot to do something for them. The functions that robots could perform at this point in time tend to be more limited than, say, having a personal PC, for instance. And the cost still tends to be prohibitive to most people. It's too expensive. It's gone down a lot, keep in mind. It's gone down to the point where now you can buy, a fairly basic, simple kit to create some type of a robot. It won't be super advanced, but it will be something. And you can do that for around $100, maybe a little less. And it continues to go down. So prices are, eventually they will drop low enough that the average person will be able to afford some robots for various tasks. And to this point, partially because of cost and the limits of how useful they are and such things, robots have mostly been confined to things like manufacturing and other areas of industry that some people deal with regularly, but most of the society doesn't see on a day-to-day basis. So it's out there, but most people don't interact with it. But as we go into the coming decades, and I really mean, take this with someone that keeps track of the developments in this field pretty closely. As we get into the next decade, 2 decades, the number of robots in a setting that's in the average person's home or the average person's workplace, the number of robots that we see in those settings are going to skyrocket. I would say by the time someone that's in kindergarten right now, by the time they graduate from high school, that person will likely deal with various types of robots on the type of daily basis that we deal with computers now. And that varies person by person, but I can say personally, I use computers on an almost constant basis. For me, even a single day without using any type of computer would be drastically different than my normal life. So for me, it's common, and many people, it's just a day-to-day activity these days. That will be true within a couple decades. And all you have to do is look at the things that are happening now. This push that's going on right now to create autonomous cars, and maybe I should say right here, there's a little bit of disagreement about what exactly a robot is, but for what I'm saying, to me, a robot is pretty much anything that will take a process and automate it for you, so that the user doesn't have to go through that process step by step manually. And the only thing I would add to that definition is it should probably be something that is differentiated from just a computer. So it has to interact with the physical world in some way. A computer can be completely self-contained, nothing coming out other than, pictures and sound, but nothing physically being changed in the world around it. A robot has to be changing things around it. So that's the only stipulation I'd add to that. But mainly it just automates some process. So yeah, there are things available today that will do that in some limited ways. You can buy a robotic vacuum, to clean your floors. You can buy a robotic lawnmower to mow your lawn. And there are limitations to these things, of course. They're not perfect, but to some extent they can do these jobs. You can, you can buy various other things that will do this task or that task, but they've all, the ones that, another one I'm thinking of is these, I don't know what the word for it is, but they're basically like a computer screen. They're a computer screen, and it has like an attached mobile platform. So someone remotely can use a camera to look around a physical environment from a distant location. And those are, starting to be used in various workplaces and such. So, but all of these things have been, it's kind of, they're limited to just this task or that task, and they're not really doing things that mostly they're, at this point, they seem more like novelties than a big deal. Of course, in a different setting, in industry, in manufacturing, robots are huge. They make that process, the process of creating manufactured items, far cheaper than it would be otherwise. And whether or not, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing that's happening is a whole nother argument that I'm not even getting into here. But it's indisputable that it has become cheaper to create a robot to make a product in many cases than it is to employ someone to do that. And again, I'm not saying whether that's good or bad. That's just what's happened. And now, as the price of these robots drops in the future, that will become more and more common. And one of the things that will happen is it will displace more and more people from those sort of manufacturing jobs. But on the other hand, it will also employ people that need to maintain these robots, that need to update them, that need to create new ones to perform different types of tasks. So all of these types of jobs will actually increase as these robots become more common. So from that standpoint, it makes absolute sense that schools would want to teach people to have that set of skills, because this is a job that in the coming decades is going to be more and more common. And I think specifically once it enters the, like I said before, once it enters the average person's house and their workplace, that's where these things, in my opinion, really tend to skyrocket. I mean, before that, there's always like limited markets, and after that point, it's like it seems to be everywhere. So I think we're going to hit that tipping point in the next couple of decades. So obviously, anyone who has some interest in getting into this field in one way or another, and there are multiple ways. That's another thing about robotics. There are multiple ways to enter into this field. Obviously, coding, programming is a big one. But of course, electronic theory is really important for robotics, and also there's huge mechanical operations to robotics, and the mechanics is actually quite complicated. The mechanics for robotics are more complicated than almost anything else you can do with mechanics. So there's multiple ways, and I'm sure there's other ones that I'm not thinking of right offhand. There's multiple ways that these fields are interacting in this one area. So there's different ways you can be interested in robotics. And me personally, I actually got interested in robotics because I like all of those things that I previously just mentioned. And I thought, well, I like all these things, so why not put them together into this one thing and do that? So that was kind of one of my big motivations for going after robotics. So obviously it makes sense to teach this for people who have an interest in the field and can see themselves doing that as some kind of a career later in life. But there's also the element of, no matter how common it becomes, it will probably not be something that everyone needs to do. Or if it is, it will only be in a limited way. Like, even if you make the argument that almost everyone uses a computer these days, not everyone needs to know how to program a computer, right? So it might be useful for you to know how to use a word processor, but that doesn't mean it will be useful for you to know how to program in C++. So there's levels of things that you might want to learn there. And so I would say, pre-college level education, the kind of things that generally you want everyone to be learning in your whole society. I would say that it would still be good in the coming decades for everyone in general to be familiar with working with robots. It doesn't mean they necessarily need to know how to build a robot or even program a robot. It's just that they should be able to interact with it in some ways. And you'll see as these things become more common for most people to use, that they'll be created with like an interface. There'll be some kind of, let's just say, like a screen, and you'll be able to input commands to do various things. And just like a computer, there's going to be, a certain understanding of this is how you do things on this device. If you have a robot, this is how you get this task done. That doesn't mean you know how to program it yourself, but you understand how to, change the font, for instance, on like a computer. There'll be things like that. So for the average person, the advantage of knowing how to interact with robots will be something they need to deal with in their day-to-day lives, again, in the near future. So it's a valuable thing to be teaching as a general subject, sort of, per se. And then there are other benefits that certain educators have realized along the way. So again, the view has been developing, and I don't know if it will continue in the future, but it's sort of developed that it's useful for almost everyone to know how to at least do a little bit of, a small amount of programming. And again, I don't know whether that will stick around or not. Is this something that everyone should learn? I'm not sure. That question has been decided yet. But the educators that have decided that it is something everyone should know have kind of realized, well, it's better to teach that in a way that you can see the results of it physically, for many students at least. So with a robot, you kind of have that interaction. If you create this code and you upload it to the robot, you can observe for yourself what the robot does. So it's a very hands-on connection for this type of subject. So for some educators have noticed that it gives a really good way to engage students, try to get them interested and give them some understanding of what you can do with this information. So I guess that's a valid point. It's actually good to find new ways to keep students interested. But for me, I guess it comes back to the main point is just that robots are going to be very common in the future. And I don't think it will be more than, in fact, I'm sure it will be less than 2 decades before they really start to take off. I mean, just think back 2 decades ago. And 2 decades ago, even computers were, let's see, that was 1997. So many people didn't even have a computer in 1997. Let alone, in that time frame, in fact, after that, smartphones came in. So that was a whole leap into itself. Just the level of constant connectedness to the information of the internet and to the whatever functions computers can do, and so just look at how common these things have become in the last 2 decades compared to what they were. And you can see, it's not hard to see how, if you look at where robots are at right now, you go out and you buy a robot vacuum cleaner, it doesn't seem like a huge deal on a society level, but 2 decades now, it could be huge. And it almost certainly will be, because as the technology for robotics advances, and it continues to advance today, it hasn't stopped at all. It's continuing to advance, and it will go much further. And as we break through new technological barriers, you're going to see that this new technology, people will start to ask, well, what tasks can I perform with this? And there's going to be a new demand for, we have this task that's always been done this one way. Well, what if we try to do it this other way instead? What are going to be the benefits of that? Can we do it that way? Things like that. And this is happening even today, by the way. It just hasn't broken out into the society at large. But, I mean, again, autonomous cars, it's still going to be a few years before those really become huge. But when they do start to become something that's just almost everyone has a car that does this, just think about how that's going to change society. It's going to be uncommon to drive yourself from point A to B. Instead, you'll turn on your car and you tell it where you want it to take you, and it will just do that automatically. I mean, that's a huge change in itself. That changes a big part of society right now. And that's just one example of what a robot can do. But there's so many other things. Whole industries are going to change. And you can see things that are happening right now. And this is going to increase exponentially in the coming years. But for instance, to give you a couple examples, autonomous car technology is also being applied to shipping, to much larger shipping trucks and shipping vessels and things of that nature. So people are looking at their companies that are, their primary objective is, for instance, to create some form of a truck that you can put what you want to ship to the other side of the country in it, and it will, without a driver, it will go there by itself. And that's going to be a huge change. that's going to unemploy a lot of people, for one thing. You could also make the argument that it can employ a different set of people. So, I'm not trying to get into the morals of whether this is right or wrong right now. I'm just saying that this is happening, and it's almost certainly is going to happen soon. And the same thing is being applied to cargo ships, even the really big ones that cross the ocean. The same ideas are being looked at in those departments. Another way that this is having a big effect, and I think when it actually happens is going to be a huge change, is in the food industry. And there are companies out there, and there are stories that you can read about that are about, they're looking for ways to create, in a few different ways, but essentially they want robots that can do a few things. They want to be able to interact with customers using a robot. They want to be able to use robots to prepare food. They want to be able to use robots to clean, workspaces, like, say, a restaurant or something, whatever it may be. I mean, you're talking about changing industries that employ so many people. And that's going to be a big change when it happens. I mean, let's be realistic here. You really think if these robots can be made and they can be run for less than it costs to keep people employed in that industry, most companies are probably going to do that sooner or later. I mean, there will be a few holdouts for one reason or another. And maybe it may even turn out that people, for instance, don't want to interact with a robot when they, say, order their food. And who knows? Who knows how that will turn out? I can't even predict. I don't think anyone can. Although I have my suspicions that once people get used to the idea of it, they may not be as bothered by the idea of ordering food from a robot as has been presented so far. I think it may not. I mean, look at ATMs, for instance. That's, by the way, that could be considered a form of a robot, depending on how you stretch the definition. ATMs have probably unemployed so many bank tellers. But here's the thing, and I'm sure it caused all kinds of controversy when they started becoming common. But how many people use ATMs every day now and don't even think about it? Some people, I bet you, even prefer using an ATM to using a person that's a bank teller. That might sound weird, but I think there is a certain group of people that actually prefer that. And there's probably a group that don't prefer that as well. So it varies, and again, it will probably come down to money in the end, which is cheaper. But there's all kinds of factors there, and I'm not even trying to get into that again. But there's a lot of industries that are going to change. I mean, those are just a few that are already in the news. They're already starting to happen, and they're going to happen a lot more as it gets cheaper to do them. But there's far, far more that haven't even been considered yet. And as the technology advances, they're going to become... I mean, if it were, let's say for instance, it were affordable to create a robot that could clean your house. And I mean, this thing would, let's just say it would be of comparable price to getting a new smartphone or something. Alright? I mean, how many people would buy that? ton of people would buy that. Who likes to clean their house? Most of us don't. It's not a fun task. So what I'm saying is that's not going to happen tomorrow, but at some point it will probably happen. I don't know if it will get quite that cheap, but it could definitely. And when it does, and I'm saying when, not if, when it does happen, it's not hard to see how this will just take off and become super common. But again, back to one of my original points. Say those house cleaning robots do take off. The average person may not need to know how to program those to do some new task. That's not the point. The point is the average person will need to know how to, do I tell them that I need them to clean my desk specifically? Or how do I tell them that I need them to clean this part of the carpets specifically? Like, you have to be able to know how to interact with it in some kind of structured manner. So I think it does make sense to teach this in school. And honestly, if you have the foresight, it's not a bad idea to start teaching it now, before these things really take off and become just part of the society. So a lot of schools have begun doing this. They've begun teaching it now to try to get ahead of this coming thing. But let's be realistic. Most of them are probably going to wait until it's already clear that this is something that everyone needs to know. So most of us, we're going to finish high school and we won't know up or down about a robot at this point. Some people, yeah, they will. Of course, there's always going to be certain people that have interests and pursue those interests whatever age they are, or schools that take particular efforts to train their students to do certain things. But in general, for now, it hasn't become the thing. But it will. So keep your eyes open. And I think the next 2 decades for sure. But obviously beyond that point, it's going to become even more. But the next few decades are really going to change the landscape of the world. And it should be interesting. I mean, to me it's very interesting that, yes, computers have made a huge change, but when you think about a computer, it's in this sort of cyber realm, it's all on a screen. It doesn't usually extend into the real world around it. But when you start putting robots in the mix, you're going to have computers. They're going to leave that cyber world, and they're going to be, what is a robot if it's not a computer with robotic arms and limbs walking around and interacting with the world around it? And of course, this is another topic as well. I should probably stop soon, but another topic you can go here is, of course, artificial intelligence. I'm not even talking about that. A robot doesn't need to have true artificial intelligence. That is a field that's going to become more and more common as well, though that will take longer. The robots will be around for a fair while before true, really advanced artificial intelligence starts to become a big deal. Oh, and I just thought of another, and that, by the way, artificial intelligence is already starting to do its own thing too, where people are now buying these I don't know what they call them, voice assistants or whatever, the things where you can speak to them and tell them to schedule things for you or look up information, and That's a form of artificial intelligence, by the way. But I don't know the names of. I think one of them's Alexa. I don't even know. I don't have one, so it's not something I've interacted with. But again, artificial intelligence is gonna get there, but I think a little more slowly, because it's still a field that's it's more in its infancy than robots are at this point. But robots can or cannot have artificial intelligence in themselves. It's, just because a robot vacuums your carpet doesn't mean it's intelligent per se. It's just following its code. So that's another discussion. I think it's good for me to end here, and I know this was just kind of me rambling on and on, but please, if you have any questions, this is a subject that I'm personally very interested in, and I'm at least semi-knowledgeable about. Probably more than that, but, doesn't hurt to try to be humble. Just ruined that, didn't I? I'm not saying I'm an expert, but it's definitely something I'm very interested in. And so if you have any questions about this or a related topic, feel free to ask me, and I'd be happy to respond.